Hey guys, happy Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday, but we'll see. Um, I am here with my good friend Joe Pentz, and we are going to be talking a little bit about what it is like to be a pilot in 2020. So if you guys have any questions, be sure to put them in the comments down there, and I will bring them up and I will ask Joe for you. So without further ado, let's bring in Joe. Hey, how's
Yes.
it going?
All right, Celia.
I'm good. Oh, John says happy Tuesday. We if you guys leave comments, then we'll have a nice little comment pop up over here.
Happy Tuesday, John.
So, Joe, I wanted to bring you on because not too many people have a little bit of a peek into the industry of being an air pilot. So tell me a little bit about I guess what it is you do and how you got into it.
Sure. So I'm a private pilot, which in essence means that I don't fly for hire. I'm able to fly really for recreation, for my own hobby and enjoyment. And I really got into it because of multiple facets. So Celia, you're familiar with this. I have my Part 107, which is remote. UAS operator, unmanned aerial system, also known in today's world as a drone. So I took the 107 test, I passed it, and I was able to operate commercially for the FAA, licensed and whatnot. And thought nothing really of it to become a pilot. And so I was doing online air traffic control in aviation, and I am really into that. And eventually got to the point where I was teaching students and whatnot of New York airspace, Philadelphia airspace, and it wasn't enough for me. So I wanted to see what it took to become a pilot. And the main two things is obviously you need a license and you need a medical certificate. The biggest hurdle for me getting my even starting the journey was getting a medical certificate because when I was young, I had a seizure disorder. So obviously seizures, pilots, they don't mix well together. The FAA doesn't want people who have seizures to be flying airplanes, understandably so. So I met with an AME, an aviation medical examiner over at Newark International Airport. His medical complex is right next door. And so I met with him and essentially we spoke for an hour and I said, what do I have to do to make this even happen? He told me the requirements, you have to be seizure free for 10 years, off medicine for 5 years for them even to look at your application and think about it. So I qualified under both those clauses. The FAA didn't make it easy. They wanted multiple different tests, but not just the test results. They wanted the physical test. So I had to go to the testing center and say, I need the physical test. And it's a very abnormal thing to ask for because a lot of people who aren't neurologists can't understand them. But, because of the law, they gave it to me. Excuse me. And so I submitted it to the FAA. 6 months later, I get a letter in the mail saying, under, part yada, yada, you're ineligible for medical certification under class 3. However, you are eligible under the special issuance clause. So I was able to get my medical certificate. And as soon as I got it, it was a really emotional moment for me because there was officially nothing stopping me in my way. I didn't let, money get in the way because it was a dream. At this point, the one hurdle that was going to get in my way was out of the way. And I said, I hate the phrase "you only live once," but that really is what I thought about. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have, a lot of financial responsibilities. So I figured, let's do it. Completed ground school online in 2 days right after I got my medical. Went into my nearby airport flight school. Said I want to start flight training. So started flight training December 3rd of 2018. And got my license on April 14th? Yes, 12th, April 12th of 2019. So it took me roughly 4 months to go from not knowing anything about being a pilot to becoming a certificated pilot.
That's a lengthy process, but there's definitely so many checkpoints that need to be completed. to get obviously a pilot's license.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned your Part 107 license. I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions about that. So you mentioned the Part 107. I had to take that test.
Mm-hmm.
That was a doozy for someone that is going to be flying a small drone going up
And down.
Because a lot of the clients that I would need that for are like small businesses or like, I don't know, a real estate agent that's trying to show off a house.
Right.
Do you think that is like, do you think that because it's not a technical, like, hey, I'm going to use my joystick and fly this test, and more of like a theory test, that they're trying to like gain interest for maybe videographers to go down that path and like possibly become a pilot like you did?
So I think the Part 107 has multiple facets to it, and the FAA is still trying to hammer it out and figure out, what the purpose was. A lot of people thought it was a money grab for the FAA. They get the testing fees and whatnot in exchange for a certificate. As a real pilot, and when I say real pilot, I mean, a pilot who flies actual aircraft versus drones, because in the FAA's, terminology, you are considered a pilot if you are Part 107. You're considered a remote pilot versus a cockpit pilot, I suppose you would say. You're still a pilot in command of some sort of aerial device or aircraft. But essentially, I think as a pilot now, I understand why the 107 is there. And I don't know if it's more to give the operator of a drone knowledge, more so it's to protect pilots who are in the air flying actual aircraft. Because that exam is very tough for someone who knows nothing about aviation. You have to be able to, what are the 3 requirements of entering a Class Bravo airspace? Can you fly here? If you go from A to Z, are you able to fly this at X amount of feet if there's a Class X airspace here? It's a tough exam for someone who doesn't know anything about it. I think the FAA is definitely trying to gauge interest with it, but I also think there's something bigger to it, because originally it was Part 141 and 107 didn't exist, and Part 141 was just a pain to get through the application process. So they rolled out Part 107, which was essentially a knowledge test. The knowledge test, anyone can study for a test, as many people know. Anyone can study for a test and pass it. It's really the operation, because I'll see people who don't have their 107 and they'll just have their drone up at 2,000 feet and be like, oh, look how high we got it. Not thinking about, aircraft that are actually flying in the airspace and, could endanger those aircraft. But that's why right now the FAA is contemplating rulemaking that's going to require, specific positioning ID and things like that. And it really has the whole aviation community up in arms about it, especially those who are 107, because of the financial impact it'll have to their business.
That makes a lot of sense, because I know that on Long Island, at least, there are many airports and many planes flying over. Obviously, LaGuardia and JFK are big hubs for either like international flights coming back into America or just all of the people in the New York metro area flying out. So it does make a lot of sense to have someone aware of that and aware of the space around airports. And even though like certain drones won't even go up by those airports, some of the older ones will. So it's better to know, hey, like it's really dangerous to go up in the air in a town such as like Bohemia, which is right next to the MacArthur Airport.
Right.
So that does make sense. At first, it seemed more so that they were just trying to like get us to know about like the maps and everything, so that like we might be interested for more, which I guess is a byproduct of that. But it's really good to hear that side, because it makes so much more sense.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it could be a byproduct, but many questions on there I understand. I mean, I've taken the 107 test and I've taken the Part 61 private pilot test. To become a private pilot, which we'll get into, the requirements for it. But the private pilot, examination process is essentially 3 tests where you have a written similar to the 107, except those questions plus aircraft procedures, regulations, things like that. You then have an oral exam with a pilot examiner who you're sitting down like we're talking right now, and they act like they know nothing about aviation, and they'll ask you, what are the requirements to be a private pilot? They'll ask you, what would happen if you lost your vacuum system? What instruments would fail in the aircraft? And then you have the practical exam, which is obviously flying the actual plane, performing all these different maneuvers and whatnot.
Gotcha. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of steps that go into this, and it's very important that they have this many checkpoints because they don't want someone who's not prepared to go and fly and then have some sort of issue in the air.
Absolutely.
I know that you are involved in air traffic simulations.
I am.
How important is it to try and do those kind of simulations before you go up into the air or to practice, or what's your take on that? I know that you have a Twitch account if you want to plug it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I do online air traffic control on a network called VATSIM, VATSIM. And that's where I was on VATSIM before I became a pilot. So I started at Philadelphia. I started as just a delivery ground controller. I worked my way up within the New York ARTCC. And so, I graduated from Philly. I moved to Kennedy, moved to LaGuardia, moved to Newark, learned all those airspaces over the span of 2 years, and then eventually graduated and learned New York Center, which is where, most aircraft are en route. So that's when, you're at cruise altitude. So, you're always talking with an air traffic controller, no matter where you are in the national airspace. But I do that virtually. And, I was learning all the phraseology to the point where I had no problem just jumping immediately onto the radio when I started my private pilot training and talking to McGuire Approach, which is the approach controller in my area. And I had no problem. And my CFI, my certified flight instructor, was, shocked that I was able to speak without issue, because that's one of the biggest hurdles that student pilots make and have to get over, is learning how to speak to air traffic control, giving them the information they need to get in and out. But no, I think it was super helpful doing that. I still enjoy it. And now I'm involved in a new online network called POSCON. That's POSCON, short for Positive Control Network, which is, the next generation flight simulation network that has a bunch of different technology that other legacy networks like VATSIM don't have. And it really is going to bring a fresh perspective to, flight simulation as it is.
That's really cool. And you've been getting pretty good traction on Twitch from what I've heard. And I commend you, because it's very hard to get big on Twitch these days.
No, absolutely. I'm really grateful. It was, I've been doing it for a little over a year, and it was just recently that, people started noticing me, larger streamers in the flight simulation community who would host me or raid me. And for those who don't know what these terms mean, host is where essentially their channel, when they're offline, will display your channel to allow for more traction. And then raiding is typically when they're live and they're ending their stream. What they'll do is they'll raid your channel, which essentially will force all their viewers onto your channel. So you can be, constant at 35 viewers. And if you have a large streamer who has 140 raid you, you just bumped your, audience up to 200 plus.
That's awesome. And it's really cool that they can do that, because it gives it's like more of a community feel instead of just me. Absolutely. Which is great.
Yeah, and for those who are curious, I'll type this to you as well, Celia. The channel for me is Digital Engineer.
All right, I'll make a little banner for you. So what was the most challenging part of getting your actual license, other than obviously the medical part? But I know that there's a lot of information that needs to be learned while I make your banner. Tell me what's been challenging.
Well, excuse me. I think the entire process overall is very challenging. You have to be dedicated to it. One of the main reasons people don't complete their private pilot training is because of the fact that they run out of money or they feel like they've hit a brick wall. So the first thing that you do when you start your training is you learn the basics of the aircraft, how to fly it. And everyone's first flight is not fantastic. I still remember my first flight, and I was controlling the plane like I was driving a car, and the plane was just like left, right. It was nauseating. In a plane, you need very, very little input, to the ailerons or to the yoke or to the throttle to see a response. The hardest part in learning to fly a plane is landing, because you have to essentially get your mind out of the fact that it's an unusual attitude. Essentially, when you're landing, you're trying to keep a constant airspeed and slowly let it bleed off. And to do that, you need to start pulling back on the yoke to the point where the plane is at a very weird angle. So you're actually looking up. You're not looking towards the runway anymore.
Oh, interesting.
So you have to let you have to trust the plane and just look at your airspeed and know that holding this attitude is eventually going to have the main wheels and the main gear touch down first, and then you relieve the pressure on it so that the nose can come down and gently rest on the runway.
I mean, that makes sense because as someone who obviously travels a lot, like looking out the window, like you're not really thinking about the actual like angle of the plane. You're usually, as a passenger, you're looking out and you're going, oh look, I see New York City, this and that. But they're just the physics of getting the plane on the ground and getting the plane up, there is trajectory involved.
Correct. And there's different maneuvers and whatnot you have to learn. So you actually learn how to stall an aircraft before you learn how to land. It's part of your private pilot exam that you stall an aircraft twice and recover it. You have to stall it in two configurations. One is called a power on stall and one is called a power off stall. The power on stall essentially is the tougher one. Because I don't want to bore everyone with the physics of it, but there's something called left turning tendencies of a propeller-based aircraft. The prop turning is going to force the nose left. You have to compensate with rudder when you're performing this maneuver. Otherwise, you're going to spin. Spinning is exactly what you think it is. The plane stalls and you're spinning towards the earth. There is something called spin training that I recommend every pilot get. I haven't gotten my spin training certification yet and sign off from my CFI, but I definitely want to because I've gotten into a spin once or twice with him. And, there's a procedure to recover, but it is very scary. And you just have to, remain constant and in focus of what you're doing.
Well, hopefully you get that training soon so that if that doesn't happen to you, you will be nice and safe.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I have another question for you. And for people that don't know Joe, he is also, in addition to being a pilot, he is an engineer. Do you think that part of the reason that flying and all of this information became like a draw for you was because you have such a technical working mind because you are an engineer?
I definitely think it contributed. No, I definitely think it contributed to it all. I think, I was able to retain knowledge and understand certain things in a different manner than I could before I was an engineer. I was always a technical person. I mean, so you knew me in college before I was, a systems engineer. But understanding the systems of an aircraft, understanding, why it did what it did, and understanding the physics and aerodynamics of how an aircraft worked, sort of, learning at first, I was like, I don't understand this. But after, physically feeling the aircraft and learning it, it sort of just clicked with me versus some other people who I know in their training just, struggle with understanding the aerodynamics of an aircraft and why it does what it does. And, what ground effect is and how it affects the, the physical nature of drag and how the aircraft performs when you're just 5 feet above the runway versus 15 feet above the runway. Gotcha.
I always have that second of, are they done? Are they not? Am I coming back on screen?
Yeah.
So you had so much really interesting information, and it's all been about like you being a pilot. I want to ask you more of a general industry question real quick.
Sure.
with everything going on with coronavirus and COVID-19, not that everyone wants to be hearing and talking about this every single day, but what have you,
No, we are.
well, yeah, I mean, it's affecting all of us, but what have you noticed in the industry and how, like, just everything has changed in a matter of, it was days, it wasn't even weeks, it was days that everything was changing?
I mean, I have a lot of friends who are pilots. And some work for the airlines, American, Envoy, United, just to name a few, and they're all affected by it. It's different levels in aviation. I can't speak to ATP and airline protocols as to staffing issues, but there's definitely seniority between first officer and captain, how long you've been at the company, what aircraft you fly on. Because the demand just isn't there for airline travel anymore. Pilots are being laid off. They're losing their jobs. There are certain pilots who still have their routes as captains and whatnot. But it's definitely affecting, the aviation industry as a whole. Private, general aviation, which is what I am, as a private pilot, I'm flying GA, general aviation. And, people are still flying because they can. But for someone like me who likes to rent aircraft, the FBO, the fixed base operations, is closed. So I can't just go up and fly, even though I'm certificated to do so. So it's hitting the industry in many different ways. The stock markets itself, bailouts, things of that nature. That's just a bigger economic scale of it all. And I'm not super savvy in the financial industry and understanding how all that works. But it's clear that the airlines are definitely taking a hit because of this. People are losing their jobs because of it. And, once, COVID-19, hopefully recovers and starts, going into our past and the world, resumes as it is, hopefully these people will need their jobs back, because prior to all this happening, there was a very high demand for the need for pilots. Airlines wanted to hire pilots. There was more demand than they had pilots to fly aircraft. So they were trying to get a lot of people in. As soon as COVID-19 took over, the entire industry flipped on its head.
Yeah, I saw everything from the other side because I traveled 3 times in the midst of everything coming to fruition, up to the day that, or the day before New York shut down. So I went to South Carolina. Everything was fine. It was just another day on the plains and everything. And then 2 weeks later, I went to Arizona, and that's when people started hearing a little bit about the virus and this and that. And like all of the people at the conference, like not all of them, but a good number of them decided that they weren't coming and this and that. On the way there, it was fine. On the way back, people started having masks and started wiping down all of the seats before we got on and things along those lines. And I was like, all right, like I still have one more trip. We'll see how this goes. And I walked into LaGuardia to go to Orlando. It was pretty empty. I was the first one on the plane, and there was no one around me. I had the entire back of the plane because everyone, for some reason, when they book your seats, they push everyone to the front, and that's
I can tell you why. That's a physics thing. It's because of the weight and the performance of the aircraft. If if the weight's more towards the back of the plane, it's more susceptible to stalling versus towards the front, where it has more positives when it comes to the physics of the aircraft, when it comes to lift and rotation.
Well, I decided to sit in the back because I wanted to have my own row. But like it started getting a little more noticeable that they were changing their practices as the physical stewardesses were taking care of everyone. By the time I was coming back from Orlando, which was March 15th, I think that was the day that New York was like shutting down. So I got back at like 10 o'clock in the morning. The Orlando airport is busy as always, but it was a lot less people. I get on the plane. All the stewardesses have masks and gloves. They asked if you wanted like something to wipe down your seat. Like they went around with wipes after they wiped it down. And like they like it just felt different because there was like a third of the amount of people on the flight.
Yeah.
Just
No, I get it. I mean, my friend is a captain for a major airline, and he says like at most he flies the Airbus A320. He said the most he's had during this time passenger wise for an aircraft that can hold a lot of people is like 30 people max.
yeah, that's crazy. And I know that I had to go through the whole, obviously you're not a part of this part, but I had to go through the whole cancellation process because I was supposed to be in Oregon next week, 2 weeks from now, whenever it was. So that has been a whole other ball game because all of these airlines either needed to do travel vouchers or they needed to do refunds and figure that out.
Right.
I know it took like a little over 2.5 weeks to get information about my cancellation just because there's that backed up.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I had have a conference in June in Vegas that hasn't been canceled yet, which I don't really understand. But it's like the second week in June, and I have all my travel still booked, and I don't know why I'm still holding out. I just need to cancel it already, because this virus isn't just going to all of a sudden, go away in the next 2 weeks. It may flatten the curve, as they say. But I'm going to have to go through that nightmare as well. So I may be texting you to see what you did.
I just sent a message saying, hey, I want to cancel. I'm eating my breakfast.
You're fine.
Why I disappeared for a second. That's what I'm doing.
No, you're fine. No, from what from what I've heard is that airlines are trying to not grant refunds and try to give you vouchers as much as possible. I'm just curious how long the vouchers are going to last, but we'll see.
The way that they did it was you have to redeem it between 6 months and a year, at least for Alaskan, because that was the one that I was going to be flying on because I was going to Oregon.
Okay.
I don't know what the other airlines are doing, but that's what the one that I had was doing. I didn't have like the travel protection on it, so I was definitely getting a voucher.
Got it. That makes sense.
That is my little tidbit of what I went through. But I also use an app called Hopper, so I had to go through Hopper to cancel.
Gotcha. Yep.
So I'm just sitting here like, oh, what is this going through? But back to the fact that you're a pilot and not the woes of the airline industry. What is your favorite moment when you're actually flying the plane? Is it takeoff? Is it landing? Is it while you're in the air? Just curious, because obviously I fly a drone. I don't fly a plane, so it's not the same experience.
I think my favorite moment as a pilot is when I have a passenger with me and I get to take them up for the first time and get to see their reaction. I have something like 150 flight hours in my logbook over the span of a year and change now. Let's say it's 4/7. So yeah, it's almost been a whole year since I got my certificate. So I have a fair amount of time in the air for a private pilot in the first year at least. And the most rewarding thing is always when I, get the person in the plane, explain everything that's going on, the noises they're going to hear, that it's completely normal. And then, we start taking off on the runway and we rotate and, you just start seeing the ground disappear away from below you and you get to see the world from a whole different perspective. And that's always the most rewarding thing to people. And they're like, wow, this is awesome. They really can't believe what's going on. But it's also for me, the freedom of being able to go wherever I want. So like last summer, I went to visit my buddy in North Carolina, and I just hopped in a plane with my girlfriend and my other buddy, and we just flew down to North Carolina. We went from New Jersey to Raleigh, North Carolina, and took roughly an hour and a half to get that down there. Obviously, it's more expensive to rent a plane than it would be just taking an airline down, but it's really more the experience that I was glad to have.
That's really cool, and it gives you a lot more flexibility in your travel. Obviously, you have to pay for the plane to be there, I'm assuming, in the other airport for like the amount of time you're renting it. Is that correct?
Well, the way that rentals work is it's on a wet or a dry scale, and by wet or dry, it means that the rental includes fuel or does not include fuel. In my case, the rental was wet, so I rented a Cessna 182 RG retractable gear, which requires a specific rating, a complex high performance rating, which I was trained in and have. And essentially, it's like 189 an hour, but it includes the fuel, and roughly low lead fuel is $5 a gallon, and that plane holds 80 gallons of fuel.
What's the name of the plane again? I'm going to see if I could get a picture. Cessna.
It's a Cessna CESSNA 182 RG.
RG. Okay, you keep talking. I'm going to get a picture.
Okay. So yeah, you rent it based upon the hours you put on the engine, not the amount of time you have it. So I rented it for the entire weekend to go down to North Carolina, but I only put something like 5 hours of time on the actual aircraft because, you know, we were flying around North Carolina, having a good time. Yeah, that's it. Out of that pop-up, that's actually almost the exact paint scheme. That's a 182 RG, and the RG stands for retractable gear. So yeah, it's a larger aircraft than the 172. It's definitely a lot roomier, but it's also a lot heavier to control. Definitely had a bit of a learning curve to it. But back to your question, it's per engine hour that's put onto it. So if you rent it for 5 hours, you're charged for those 5 hours. But if you need to refuel to get back, they deduct the charge of your refueling from your rental because it's a wet rental.
That makes sense. This is like a whole other side of like flying that you don't think about. Like obviously, like flying is an expensive hobby,
Right?
And that's why like people that like obviously own planes and such usually have expendable income. But like I don't know where I was going with that other than the fact that people have a lot of money when they own a plane.
No, I get it. I mean, I do know people who own their own planes. Would I love to own a plane one day? Yes, but I also know that the cost of owning a plane is a lot more than renting it. And I think the math, because I've found calculators online from other people who own aircraft, essentially you need to fly something like 70 hours a year to even make it worth it. Because you have to have annual inspections, which can range from $3,000 if it's just a simple oil change and breakdown, making sure all the components are good, to $50,000 if the engine needs an overhaul. So it can really vary when it comes to your annual. So that's why a lot of people sweat it, but you have to have a good savings mentality to be able to own an aircraft. So it's not just putting fuel in the plane anymore. It's now, okay, I'm going to put, X amount of fuel into my plane, but I also need to factor in the, maintenance costs here. So every flight I need to put in $25 into my savings to offset per hour the annual cost that I may incur at the end of the year or when my annual is up. Because without an annual, the aircraft is not airworthy, which means it's not allowed to fly. If you're caught with an aircraft that's unairworthy, you can lose your license if you were flying it.
Gotcha. That's just like how you have to take your car in to get inspected, at least in New York, once a year, or else you get a ticket, get in trouble.
Right.
But it's a little more fatal for an airplane than a car.
Exactly.
So one day when you get your plane.
Yes, one day.
Where is like that dream place you want to fly to, or that like is there like a further distance place that you think would be amazing for you to go to?
I mean, I would love to fly to the Bahamas one day. It's definitely attainable in the right aircraft, but really the not long term but short term goal is to get my instrument rating, which for those that don't know, you get your private pilot license, which allows you to fly during VFR conditions, visual flight rules, aka not bad weather, not low visibility, not in clouds. You can fly below clouds, you can fly above clouds, you cannot fly in clouds. So want to get my instrument rating as soon as I can, and I can afford it because it's not only to have the rating, but it's also a big get out of jail free card. Because if you are, let's say you and me, Celia, we fly to Orlando or we fly to Atlanta, wherever we go. And we're there for a few days.
This year, so let's go to Atlanta.
Okay, that sounds great. So we go to Atlanta and, we plan to depart in 2 days, come back to New Jersey or New York. But the weather all of a sudden changes and there's a massive cloud deck at 1,000 feet. Without my instrument rating, I legally cannot get out. I need an instrument rating to be able to fly through that cloud deck to get back. So it's really a get out of jail free card. Having just your private pilot is always cool, provided that the weather's good. But if the weather ever changes, that can be detrimental to you. And a lot of pilots have died because of going into a cloud and not knowing how to handle it. And it's one of the cases of this is controlled flight into terrain, also known as CFIT, where they're controlling the aircraft, but they're not looking at their instruments. When you're within a cloud, your body is going to trick you with your eyes as well, because your eyes will think there's a horizon within the cloud, but it's actually the texture of the cloud that's tricking you. And if you look at your attitude indicator, which is the instrument that tells you, is your plane level? Is it banking? If you look at it, many times you'll be in a 30-degree bank and not realize it when you think you're level, because your body will lie to you, making you think it's level when it's not.
That must be like a trippy feeling, because it's like going into like a sensory deprivation tank for a little bit, because I've done that. I still don't have an opinion on it, just because it was a weird experience. Like, you're weightless, but also like you're in a small area, just like you are in the front of a plane. But it must be difficult to discern that without going through proper training. So it makes a lot of sense. And I hope that you're able to get that training soon.
No, absolutely. And I mean, when you get your private pilot certificate, you have to do at least 10 hours of instrument training, just so that you're exposed to it and you know how to deal with it. But they'll put your instructors will, you have to do night flight. And especially on the Jersey Shore, if you're flying out over the ocean towards the ocean, there's no horizon at night. So your brain will physically, revert to your body's instinct. And 99% of the time, it'll be wrong if you don't trust the instrument.
Gotcha. So we're coming up towards the end here. We're going to hop off at 11 because I have to go and be in a Zoom meeting apparently. But I wanted to ask you, if someone out there is interested in becoming a pilot, what advice do you have for them?
So for those of you who are interested in becoming a pilot, first off, I would say, do your research, learn what it's all about. Because it's a long process and it's a grueling process. You really have to be able to focus on it and really love what you do. The financial component to it is a whole nother thing. I would say, call your nearby flight school, say, how much are your instructors per hour? How much is your aircraft per hour? Is it wet or dry? Because that's a big cost difference. And, look into the certification programs, because there are two tracks. There's Part 61 and Part 141. Part 61 is more lax, where you can do it at your own pace, and there aren't stage checks. But Part 141 is more structured, where there are stage checks and whatnot, and each comes with its own financial impact and knowledge gain in their own respect. So do your research, but don't let, the financial burden get in your way. If you're in the position to, take on such a burden and, pay it off a couple years down the road, I would not suggest you stray away just because of the financial impact of it. It's definitely, aviation is an expensive hobby and whatnot to maintain. And I can tell you, if someone told me, you're going to spend X amount of dollars, I'd be like, that's a lot of money. But by far, it's been the most rewarding decision I've made in my entire life. And the way that I look at it now, I got my instrument and advanced ground instructor certificate. So I'm teaching students now on the ground. And there's no better joy to me than teaching someone who loves aviation and wants to get, more involved in it and get their pilot certificate and, maybe go to the airlines, maybe just become a commercial pilot flying, corporate jets. there's no better reward to me than seeing a student succeed. And I've had, plenty of students pass through who I've done exam prep with for hours on end, multiple times, and I'm glad to boast 100% pass rate on them, because I try to explain many of the concepts to them in a relatable way, so that when they go into their oral exam with the examiner, they're in and out in 45 minutes because they know all the knowledge, versus some people who will be in the exam for 4 hours just doing the oral. So to summarize, if you want something, go for it. Don't let the financial situation burden you if you can avoid it and you're in the position to take it on. And get involved early. Just because you maybe can't afford or aren't in the position to start pilot training doesn't mean you can't take a discovery flight or hang around an airport and starting to get to know people. Because the thing about aviators, especially in general aviation, is that if you ask them, listen, I'm looking to become a pilot, I've never been in a plane, they most likely will want to get you involved, because we all have the same love for aviation.
I love that you're really driving home the point to follow your passion, because if you are passionate about flying or the perspective of trying it and seeing if it's for you, you really should look into it. You really should do the research and maybe take that step. Maybe not right now during coronavirus.
Yeah.
But once everything is moving again, go look into it. Go visit. I know at least over by where I am, I was able to go and take my test, but they actually had lessons and all of these type of things at the airport. So definitely take a look at that. And you can also reach out to Joe. I get on his DMs over here on Instagram likely, and he will talk to you about that. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So Joe, how are people going to find you after this live stream?
So as you can see on the ticker below me, you can follow me on Twitch. I usually stream a couple of times a week, usually night times is what I do. As you can see on my lower third, that's my Twitter handle. Those are probably the best two ways to reach me. My Twitter is less active, but I do get notifications on it. So if you reach out, I can give you access to my socials and really get you involved.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today, Joe. I really appreciate you coming and talking a lot about this, because this is something people may not have a window into and may be interested in doing after, obviously, the coronavirus is wrapped up. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Absolutely, Celia. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So if you guys want to reach Joe, obviously, Instagram, Twitch, Twitter, whatever it may be, reach out to him and he'll have a really nice conversation with you about flying. So Joe, I'm going to take you off of here and I am going to wrap up. So say goodbye.
Bye, guys.
All right. So thank you so much to everyone that came and watched the stream today. Thank you for your comments. I know that we had one from my friend John. If you guys want to watch this again, it will be on Facebook and it will be on YouTube. And I am also putting the audio of this on SoundCloud if anyone would like to listen to it on there. Working on Apple Podcasts, that should be up in the next couple of days. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you coming and spending your Tuesday morning with us. I figured it out. It is Tuesday. And I hope that you guys have a great day. We're going to be on tomorrow with my personal trainer. His name is Eric Prush from Relentless Strength and Performance. So that'll likely be at 3 o'clock, and I will confirm that very soon. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.